Yes, it's been a month since the release of Seed Recollection, and with my channel being flooded with Seed content, I just knew I had to make this video detailing my thoughts about it. I've been busy with a lot of things, but for now, I'm back. It's time to dive into what works and what doesn't in this prequel for Destiny. Around 20 years ago, Seed Destiny was conceived as a work that succeeded its original predecessor, and with it being a sequel, the setting introduced a 2-year time jump. Many fans have infamously referred to this time skip as a blank 2 years, although there's many supplementary works over the years that detail certain events of the blank 2 years. We actually never got any animated form of content about our main character's whereabouts during this gap. With Recollection being advertised as a follow-up of Seed's original ending, bridging together the events of Destiny, I began to ask and wonder, how well does this prequel fare? Well, I understand that Destiny may be a very controversial series, but the fact that it exists will always persist. Destiny is the official sequel to Seed, and is incredibly important to the overarching narrative of its sequels and world building. Creating a prequel is like playing with fire. If done well, it can give more added elements to certain motives and characterizations not seen in the sequel. However, if some aspects are poorly constructed, then it would create issues in aspects of established lore implied. Such concept will be the main question / topic of the video today. How well does Seed Recollection work as a bridge between Seed and Seed Destiny? And how well does Seed Recollection's narrative hold up? Alright, first off, I'm going to say this, but if you're a Kira or a Lakis fan or enjoyer, you guys are really going to enjoy their characterization. I like how Bandai or Fukuda, I don't even know if he wrote this, but I like how they stayed true to Kira's characteristics in Seed Recollection. Going into the game's story, I wondered if the writers remembered how Seed Kira acted. Because I remember Kira isn't the type to sit around and let things be if he had the choice to do what's necessary. He's not like Athrun, who's too reflective and stops in his tracks. Kira is always on the move whenever he decides to bear arms. It's like what happened with the Destroy Gundam and Attack on Heaven's Base. There are scenes of Kira clenching his fists, wanting to go out in the field to at least make a difference. If this story event really does take place before the epilogue as implied, I'd say Kira would still somewhat want to make a difference at this point in time. If a man tells himself he can't do anything, he will never be able to do anything again, and he'll end up doing even less. Is a quote that comes to mind from his first appearance as the Freedom's pilot. Kira is not as jaded as he was at this point, I believe, so maybe he still has spirit left inside him to fight. Seed Recollection does well in exemplifying these aspects that I really like about Kira. Even after all the bullshit he's seen in the final battle at Jackin Duel, he still wants to fight for change. It seems that Kira, in this point of the story, he's still a little bit optimistic. So his PTSD about Raw and Flay being killed hasn't kicked in yet. So when playing Recollection, I get the sense that it's Kira from a different point of time, unlike his other incarnations in Destiny and Seed Freedom, where he's more reserved and quiet. I also have to give Soichiro Hoshi props for having it in him to do his younger Kira voice here to illustrate a more hopeful outlook as contrasted by the later portrayals of Kira where he's more solemn, but yet at the same time tired. So it was definitely very nice to hear a young Kira again from the time of Seed, so I very much appreciate that. Alright, now going to the antagonists of the story. I also enjoyed Kira's interactions with the antagonist of Recollection, Shiva, as well. I kinda wish that she wasn't just delegated to this special and was used in other things, but for a one-off and done character, I think she was alright to say the least. Now, what I'm gonna say may seem strange, but I can't help but feel that she's similar to Kira in a sense. And I don't mean that Kira is a bloodthirsty monster or a person who wants to incite conflict for selfish goals, just like her, but rather it's the feelings and emotions of love. Shiva's origin is a little basic, a little cookie cutter basic with the whole, my family died, so I'll be drawn to the feelings of revenge and all that. But I think it's primarily through this intense feeling of love that ignited her anger to engage in this crusade of hers. Now, is it excusable? No, definitely not. But is there a purpose behind her actions? Yes, of course, absolutely. You see, love and anger are very passionate feelings, and these feelings are something that we can't just mend over to time. We can't just ignore the passionate feelings we've once had, and sometimes to satisfy this unquestionable like sensation, this gives birth to a sense of needing to act. Shiva's actions are from the feelings of sorrow, and due to such emotions, she's not satisfied yet with the outcome of the war. In a way, it's kind of like saying she wanted the naturals to suffer in the same way as she did. In her eyes, they haven't suffered enough, just like her. Only through the suffering of naturals can she clench her lost feelings, something that can give meaning and merit to the sacrifice of her own family. Scars are difficult to heal from, but unlike the wounds we've endured, those eventually heal. But a scar on the heart lingers. It's proof of how the world's travesty has affected it. For some, that scar never mends, and as such, we humans engage in actions fueled by such scars left on our heart. And it's like what Seed has always been saying, scars, they never heal. And said scars hold memories. Memories of battles and of course, feelings that all tell a story. Her scars couldn't heal because of all the things the war took away from her. And that's why her love turned into sour feelings. I also want to point out there's actual scenes where she cared enough about her team members to actually give them the chance to go back to the ship. It gives characterization for a one-off character, which I'm surprised they did. It was this love for her family and even love for fellow coordinators that made her engage in revenge. While on the other hand, Kira himself has a familiar sense of love too. And that love is his love for humanity. He still believed in a future worth fighting for. You know, props for the writer leaving that line in and staying true to his character. I like that. Anyways, that's why I believed Kira cried for her, even though he only knew her for, a day? You know, he knew that she wasn't completely evil as shit, like Raw, despite her terrorist mindset. All the young boy saw was a woman who lost it all and went crazy. Both Kira and Shiva had a feeling of tenderness that stopped them from committing the harder choices. Shiva's love for her people made her a terrorist, but at the same time, deep inside, she was never true to her own ideals of killing her own people who opposed her. She self-deleted even before doing so. And it was Kira's love for humanity that stopped them from killing her. Because deep inside, Kira saw parts of her real nature. And even Lakis understood her pain too. Now, I think such a moment here reinforces a trait lost to Kira later on, and why I honestly like the Seed version of him a lot better. Kira, he's always been a kind guy, and for him to see through the worst of his enemies is a trait that has its merits. Now, I'm not saying that Kira isn't kind later in his other showings, like, in Seed Destiny or Freedom, but what I'm trying to say is, I like the portrayal during his younger days better. Now, in the end, Shiva was borderline a despicable and even selfish villain, but I can't help but feel that there's some broad strokes of tragedy in her story as it is. Alright, so now on to the negatives. Now, an online friend and I have been discussing about how Recollection should and could have delved deeper into Kira's tired mentality that we would later see in Destiny. So it's implied that this whole event takes place before the epilogue of OG Seed. The scene where Kira and friends are chilling on the beach and Athrun tries to console him. I've been trying to find a legit, I've been trying to find that scene, but I haven't found it anywhere. I know it exists, but for some reason it's not on YouTube anywhere. Alright, anyways. Now, I think that a necessary course of action to ease more into the characters we see in Destiny would much be appreciated. I mean, it was advertised as the events bridging Seed and Seed Destiny together. I understand that seeing your ex-girlfriend getting murked while fighting a genocidal maniac will screw up your brain, but for some reason here, Kira doesn't seem to be suffering from the effects of said events. I think such a concept of diving more into how tired Kira would eventually become could be expanded more upon here. And the same could be said for Lakis. Her father just died a couple months ago, but she doesn't seem to be tired or suffering from feelings of anguish. Although, in my headcanon, I like to think that Lakis is being strong for the sake of the memories her father left her. I'm sure that her father wouldn't want her to be sad over the events that happened, and to be strong is to try her best to continue her father's path of peace. She's trying her best to be a leader like her father, even if she has to put on a facade. To the people and her allies, Lakis is a strong person, ready to do what it takes and guide the people. But when she's alone, she's just like every one of us, a person with feelings that has to be mended. When she's alone with Kira, Both of their feelings are entrusted to each other, her pain and tears overlapping with Kira's emotions. All in all, both are still young and trying their best, but just like the scenes that we've been shown, the two still have trauma only they can entrust to each other. All in all, for Kira and Lax's side of the story, I think it would suffice even if a bit more could be done. I like it, but I can't say the same for Athrun's side of things. Oh boy. So while Kira's story is relatively straightforward, Athrun's side of things is rather incoherent and suffers from the problem of detracting from his overall narrative that we would later see in Destiny. Okay, now let me explain, okay? You see, Athrun's story has him dealing with the remnants of athrunzala's forces who are actively using his name to commit acts of terror. Doesn't that sound familiar? As in dealing with terrorists with ties of athrunzala of all people? But, it seems as if I've seen this somewhere. But of course, it's from the first 12 episodes of Destiny, 20 years ago. And this is the big problem I have with Athrun's story. If Athrun already went through similar events here before the start of Destiny's story, then it would overall detract from the events of the Junior 7 drop, which of course was a major element that started off Athrun's arc in Seed Destiny. But if he's already dealing with the issue regarding said remnants here and now, it would make the anime version feel less special and impactful if he would later go through the same events later again. Remember, in Destiny, Athrun was so shocked about the Junior 7 terrorists using his own father's name that he started tripping balls and started doubting himself. I made a video about that a couple months ago. The same thing is happening here in Recollection, but with the added issue that the terrorists here are also using Athrun's name in vain. But surprisingly, he doesn't seem to be shaking to his core like during the events of Seed Destiny, where he had to be saved by Shin. It's strange here that Athrun seems to be normal. He wasn't distracted or indecisive like he was at the start of Destiny when faced with the same turbulence. He's not hesitating or anything like the version we see in Destiny. So we're led to believe that this Athrun will eventually become the one that we see at the start of Destiny. But honestly, I just can't see that. Here, he's relatively in the right state of mind. But once he goes through the same trials again at the start of Destiny, all of a sudden, he's suffering from massive inner turmoil regarding his father's issues. Now, the PTSD stuff about his father in the Orb Cabinet is fine. But like I said, if he's faced these type of obstacles before, then why was he so shocked and taken aback against remnant terrorists committing acts of treason later in Destiny? Granted, I will say there's been a 2-year time skip, so maybe Athrun thought that these remnants no longer existed, and maybe by the time Seed Destiny came by, Athrun was so shocked to find out later that during episode 7 that the world itself hasn't changed. There's also the fact that the plotline with Athrun's name being used in vain could also be used to tie into his Alex Dino persona, but such an idea is not present and fails to land any lasting effect on Athrun and or the plot. It's also implied that Athrun probably took the name Alex Dino to further separate himself from this event. I think exploring more about why Athrun took up a new name could have been focused upon this story. I mean, they got all the tools here. Some dude is using his and his father's name to engage in terrorism. The tools is all right there. But I just feel like the writers just aren't taking full advantage of what's given. Instead, in the end, it's just implied that Athrun took the name of Alex Dino, just off screen, and that's just kinda it. I also want to bring up the fact that some of the dialogue between Kigali and Athrun brings up some questions later in Seed Destiny. And what I mean is that in Recollection, there's dialogue that makes it clear Kigali knew the remnants of athrunzala was behind all of this. But later in Seed Destiny, she seemed kinda clueless when she found out the truth about who was behind Junior 7. So, I'm just wondering, did Kigali and Athrun just not talk about the whole terrorist fiasco? Because later in Destiny, that seems to be the case, especially with how the pair were acting. The ending scene also implied that the two did have a talk, so there's that. But did the topic of Athrun's PTSD or anything like that not come up? These two are fiancés and are extremely close with each other, so I do find it strange that Athrun couldn't open up to his own partner in a 2-year time gap. I do understand that yes, running a country, post-war economy, and trying to get it back to his feet is incredibly hard and takes a lot of effort, especially in the Gundam universe. But with that in mind, there's probably not a lot of time to communicate and talk about these type of things. And regarding Athrun's personality, he's also the type who is a very closed-off person who keeps to himself. And I can see him probably saying things like, that's not important what I have going on. There's more out there that we need to focus on. So something along the lines like that comes to mind. He's always the type of person to shield his own problems by focusing on the greater good, despite how harmful such a mindset can be. Also, one last thing before I move on towards my concluding thoughts. But is it just me, or did the conflict end a little too quickly? Coordinator terrorists literally launched what is essentially a hate crime, and especially in Seed, peace is incredibly fickle. Such an act alone could have bring forward another conflict or war, but to see the conflict avoided by dialogue is a bit strange. I think I might be tripping, but because in my mind, I'm comparing this to the other events in Seed that kickstarted their respective conflicts. The difference here is that maybe there wasn't any mass amount of casualties or anything like that, so maybe I guess that's why the EA and ZAF are quick to shake hands and call it a day. Then again, this is a post-war economy and both sides were faced with huge losses, so continuing the battle would be suicide for both sides anyways. Logos and Blue Cosmos don't seem to be present either to manipulate the events in their favor, so there's that as well. But I don't know, man. I'm a little mixed at how the story ended through exposition, just like age. Alright, so it's time for my concluding thoughts. Do I think Recollection is an absolute must-see before going to Destiny's story? No, not really. You can just kinda skip it. Does it fit into the overall narrative with the characters and all that? Kinda, yeah. Although, a little more, I think, could have been expanded upon. Overall, Recollection is definitely a surprise to be sure, but a welcome one. And like I said at the start of the video, if you're a Kira and Lycus fan, you're going to enjoy it, but I don't think I can say the same for Athrun enjoyers. I forgot to mention this earlier, but I like how this story actually delved into the sassy nature of Athrun, man. It's pretty funny that it all started from here before, the sassiness took over in Seed Destiny and Freedom.